It started like any other night for 18-year-old Shemaiah Near Allen, a young woman just beginning to find her place in the world. Bright-eyed, full of dreams, and deeply loved by her family, she never imagined that this evening would be her last. Shemaiah had been in a relationship with 34-year-old Brian Jackson, a man nearly twice her age. From the outside, people noticed the unusual age gap, but few could have predicted just how deadly this relationship would become. Behind closed doors, the love she thought she found was slowly turning into something dark and dangerous. On April 21st, everything changed. Shemaiah and Brian were in a home on Litchfield Road, located in a quiet Cleveland neighborhood. Neighbors heard shouting, a sign of the arguments that had become all too common between the couple. But no one expected the horror that was about to unfold. Within moments, the argument escalated. According to reports, Brian pulled out a gun during the altercation and fired multiple shots at Shemaiah. The sound of gunfire pierced the silence of the neighborhood. When first responders arrived, they found Shemaiah's lifeless body, shot and left on the floor in what should have been a place of safety. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Shemaiah didn't stand a chance. At just 18 years old, her life was brutally stolen from her by the man she once trusted, the man she believed loved her. Police quickly identified Brian Jackson as the suspect. He didn't flee. He stayed behind, as if fully aware of the damage he had done. Officers arrested him on the spot, charging him with aggravated murder. He showed little emotion as he was taken into custody. The community was shocked. Family and friends poured out their grief on social media, describing Shemaiah as sweet, vibrant, and full of life. They couldn't understand how this could have happened, how someone so young, so full of promise, could be taken so suddenly. As the news spread, it became clear that this wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a chilling reminder of the dangers so many young women face in toxic, controlling relationships. People who knew Brian said he was possessive and jealous. And in the end, that jealousy turned deadly. Now, Shemaiah's loved ones are left with memories and questions. Could someone have stopped this? Were there warning signs? And most painfully, why did this happen to her? This is the tragic story of Shemaiah Near Allen, a story that demands to be told, a story that reminds us of the urgency to speak up, protect our youth, and never ignore the signs of an unhealthy relationship. This is not just another crime. This is a life lost too soon. Those who knew Shemaiah Near Allen say she lit up every room she walked into. Her laughter was contagious, and her kindness ran deep. Shemaiah grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. She was close with her family and loved by her friends. Whether she was cracking jokes, making TikTok videos, or just talking about her dreams, she always brought a special kind of light into people's lives. Her youth was filled with the energy of someone who hadn't yet been jaded by the world. But like many young women her age, Shemaiah was also navigating love, trying to understand what it meant to trust, to feel wanted, to feel safe in someone else's arms. And that's how she met Brian Jackson. He was older, much older. At 34, Brian was twice her age. That kind of age gap raised eyebrows. But Shemaiah, like many teens, was still learning what healthy love was supposed to look like. At first, Brian seemed charming. He knew what to say, how to make her feel special. He gave her the attention and presence that can be overwhelming and intoxicating for someone just entering adulthood. But over time, the dynamic began to shift. What began as flattery became control. What felt like protection slowly turned into possessiveness. Those close to Shemaiah started noticing changes. She became quieter. She stopped spending as much time with friends. She avoided conversations about Brian. Like so many young people trapped in toxic relationships, Shemaiah may not have realized how deep she had fallen into emotional quicksand. Brian, on the other hand, had a darker side. While not much about his past has been publicly detailed, people began to notice a pattern in his behavior. Controlling, easily angered, and unwilling to let go. His need to dominate wasn't just emotional. It was manipulative and dangerous. Still, Shemaiah stayed. Maybe she thought she could fix things. Maybe she believed that love meant forgiving, even when it hurt. Or maybe, like many victims of emotional abuse, she didn't see a way out without making things worse. Whatever her reasons, She stayed, hoping for something to change. That hope would eventually cost her everything. Their relationship lasted for about 2 years. 2 years filled with ups and downs, moments of peace and periods of fear. And though she tried to manage the storm, the truth is, she was still a teenager caught in a situation no teenager should ever have to face. By the time April 21st came, things had already spiraled far beyond normal. And though she likely didn't know it, the person she once trusted most was about to become the one who ended her life. Shamaya's relationship with Brian Jackson began when she was just 16, at an age when most teenagers are still figuring out who they are. She found herself pulled into a romance with a man nearly twice her age. Brian was 34, and at first his maturity and confidence may have seemed appealing. To someone still new to love, his attention felt powerful, almost like safety. In the beginning, Brian played the role of a protector. He showered her with compliments, stayed close, and made her feel important. He called often, texted constantly, and kept tabs on where she was. But what might have seemed like love in those early stages soon revealed something far more dangerous. Control disguised as care. Over time, Brian's actions grew more intense. He didn't just want to know where she was. He wanted to decide it. He didn't just want her attention. He wanted all of it. Shamaya's friends noticed her drifting away. She stopped going out as much. She withdrew from social circles that once brought her joy. It was as if Brian had drawn a circle around her and shut the rest of the world out. Arguments became common. Even small disagreements turned into shouting matches. Brian was easily triggered, jealous, suspicious, and quick to accuse. Shamaya, caught in the emotional chaos, often tried to keep the peace. Like many young women, she may have mistaken his anger for passion, believing that if she just loved him more, things would get better. But Brian didn't want peace. He wanted control. His jealousy wasn't about love. It was about possession. He reportedly hated the idea of her talking to other men, even in casual settings. He reportedly demanded loyalty but gave little respect in return. And while the world saw a young girl trying to hold on to love, what was happening behind the scenes was much darker. Shamaya's family, while concerned, didn't always see the full extent of what was going on. Victims of toxic relationships often hide the worst parts out of fear, shame, or belief that things will improve. And Brian knew how to keep things quiet. He manipulated her emotions, keeping her hopeful one moment and crushed the next. For Shamaya, the line between love and fear began to blur. There were probably moments she wanted to leave, but leaving an abuser is never easy. It's complicated. It's emotional. And for someone so young, it can be terrifying. Still, there were signs that she was growing tired. She started expressing frustration, maybe even thinking about stepping away. But for Brian, any hint that he was losing control may have felt like betrayal. To a man like him, letting go wasn't an option. Their relationship wasn't just unhealthy. It was volatile. And as the days passed, it became a ticking time bomb. No one knew exactly when or how it would explode, but those closest to Shamaya knew she was living in a pressure cooker. Sadly, the pressure reached its breaking point on April 21st. By then, their relationship had turned into a battlefield, and Shamaya, just 18, became a casualty of a love that was never safe to begin with. April 21st began like any other spring day in Cleveland, Ohio. The sky was calm, the breeze gentle. But inside the home where Shamaya Near Allen and Brian Jackson stayed, tension was quietly building. It wasn't just another day. It was a day everything would fall apart. Neighbors later recalled hearing the sound of Ray's voices coming from inside the residence. It wasn't the first time arguments had echoed through the walls, but this time felt different. The shouting was louder, more desperate, as if something had finally snapped. Shamaya, just 18 years old, was in the middle of another heated argument with her boyfriend of 2 years, Brian Jackson, who was 34. The age difference between them had always carried a quiet warning, but today it erupted into violence. The details of what exactly sparked the confrontation remain unclear, but it was clear that whatever triggered it, Brian was no longer just angry. He was unhinged. In a flash, the situation turned deadly. Brian pulled out a firearm and aimed it at the young woman he once claimed to love. Without mercy or hesitation, he pulled the trigger multiple times. Each shot struck Shemaiah with irreversible force, tearing through a future that had barely begun. When the gunfire stopped, silence filled the air. Shemaiah lay on the floor, motionless. Her body, now lifeless, was a heartbreaking image of innocence stolen. She had no time to run, no chance to defend herself. The violence was swift and final. Emergency responders rushed to the scene after neighbors called 911. When they arrived, there was nothing more they could do. Shemaiah had already succumbed to her injuries. Officers confirmed her death at the scene, marking the end of a young life filled with dreams, laughter, and so much untapped potential. Brian didn't run. He stayed at the scene as officers arrived. His demeanor was cold, emotionless, as if he had accepted what he had done without remorse. Police immediately arrested him and took him into custody. In that moment, the man who once claimed to love her became the man responsible for taking her life. The community went into mourning. Shemaiah's friends and family, stunned and broken, tried to make sense of what had happened. Social media lit up with grief-stricken posts. Photos of her smiling, messages of disbelief, and desperate cries for justice. Everyone who knew Shemaiah described her as bright, kind, and full of promise. That she died in such a brutal way, at the hands of someone she trusted, only deepened the heartbreak. The shockwave rippled far beyond her neighborhood. This wasn't just a private tragedy. It was a public loss, a reminder of how quickly things can turn deadly in an abusive relationship. April 21st will forever be remembered as the day Shemaiah's light was extinguished, a day when love turned violent, a day when silence could no longer protect the vulnerable. And now, the world must remember her name, not just for how she died, but for the life she should have lived. When officers arrived at the scene on Litchfield Road, they walked into a quiet home filled with the smell of gunpowder and the eerie stillness that follows a tragedy. Shemaiah Nier Allen lay on the floor, her body cold, lifeless, and riddled with gunshot wounds. There was no struggle left, no pulse to check, just a devastating confirmation that a young woman's life had been taken far too soon. Brian Jackson stood nearby. He didn't resist. He didn't flee. It was as though the weight of his actions had either numbed him or didn't faze him at all. Officers approached and placed him under arrest, charging him on the spot. He offered no explanation, no panic, no apology. Just silence. As investigators combed to the home, they gathered critical pieces of evidence. Shell casings, firearm, and anything that could explain what led to the eruption of violence. They took photos of the scene, documented the blood splatter, and pieced together the timeline of the final minutes of Shemaiah's life. Detectives also interviewed neighbors and family members, trying to understand the couple's history. What they found painted a clearer picture. This was a sudden outburst. It was a tragic climax of a long, toxic relationship marred by control, jealousy, and emotional volatility. Friends and loved ones shared that Shemaiah had shown signs of wanting to leave. Some said she felt suffocated by Brian's possessiveness. Others recalled arguments, moments of fear, and times when she withdrew into herself. Those red flags, so common in abusive relationships, had been there all along, quietly waving. The police took all of it seriously. They charged Brian Jackson with aggravated murder and possession of a weapon under disability. These weren't minor accusations. They were weighty, the kind that recognized the severity and cruelty of what he had done. Prosecutors vowed to pursue the case with everything they had. Meanwhile, Shemaiah's family had to face the unthinkable. They identified her body at the coroner's office, planned a funeral, and answered questions from investigators, all while trying to understand how their daughter, their sister, their friend could be gone forever. News of the arrest spread across local media. Mugshots were posted. Articles described the case with clinical language, domestic dispute, fatal shooting. But those words didn't capture the full weight of the loss. Behind every headline was a broken family and a young girl who should have been alive. Brian remained in custody, held without bond. As the investigation moved toward court proceedings, prosecutors gathered witness statements, surveillance footage, phone records, anything that could ensure justice for Shemaiah. And while legal systems moved forward, her loved ones were left clinging to memories. The arrest didn't bring Shemaiah back. It didn't fill the empty space she left behind. But it was a step, one that said her life mattered, that what happened to her would not be brushed aside, that someone would be held accountable for extinguishing a light the world still needed. Following his arrest, Brian Jackson was booked into the Cuyahoga County Jail. Prosecutors moved quickly to file formal charges: aggravated murder and having weapons under disability, serious offenses that reflected the brutality of what he had done. The court denied him bond, making it clear that the justice system viewed him as a dangerous individual who could not be trusted with his freedom. At his first court appearance, Brian stood before a judge, emotionless. The courtroom was quiet, tense. Shamaya's family sat just a few feet away, trying to hold back tears. It was their first time seeing the man who had taken their daughter's life since that tragic night. The weight of the moment was heavy, but they sat with strength and quiet dignity. Prosecutors laid out the early facts of the case. They described the toxic relationship, the history of control, and the final violent outburst that left Shamaya dead. They emphasized her age, her vulnerability, and how Brian's actions were not just impulsive, but deeply rooted in patterns of possessiveness and emotional abuse. The court scheduled preliminary hearings, and both sides began preparing for trial. The prosecution started building their case, interviewing witnesses, collecting evidence from the scene, and pulling together text messages, call logs, and photographs. Every detail mattered. They weren't just seeking a conviction. They were seeking justice for Shamaya's life. Meanwhile, Brian's defense attorney remained silent in early hearings, opting not to comment on a potential plea deal. Whether Brian would accept responsibility or force the family through the emotional weight of a full trial remained unclear. But one thing was certain: the truth would come out one way or another. As the legal process unfolded, Shamaya's family found themselves in a new kind of grief: legal grief. It's the kind that lingers in courtrooms, paperwork, and statements to the press. It's the pain of having to relive her murder over and over again in every hearing, every headline, every retelling of the facts. Local advocates and domestic violence organizations stood with them. Some held community vigils. Others used Shamaya's story to raise awareness about the warning signs of abusive relationships, especially when significant age differences are involved. Her name became more than just a headline. It became a call for protection, for prevention, for justice. With each court date, more supporters showed up. They wore T-shirts with Shamaya's photo. They held signs outside the courthouse. They shared her story online. And slowly, her voice, once silenced, began to echo louder and louder through the halls of justice. The trial is still pending, but the pressure for accountability remains strong. The community is watching. The family is waiting. And the prosecution is determined to make sure that Brian Jackson is never free to harm another woman again. Because in the end, this case isn't just about punishment. It's about standing up for a young woman whose life was stolen. It's about honoring Shamaya Near Allen with truth, with justice, and with the unwavering belief that her story matters. The moment news of Shamaya's death reached her family, their world shattered. Her mother, who had watched her grow from a bubbly little girl into a beautiful young woman, now faced a reality no parent should ever endure: burying her child. The grief was immediate and overwhelming. The pain was deep, the kind that leaves no room to breathe. Friends couldn't believe it. Some had just spoken to her days before. Others had plans to hang out, go shopping, or study together. But suddenly, all those plans were gone. In place of laughter and selfies came candles, tears, and the silence of absence. Her name, once shouted across school hallways or texted late at night, now echoed only in mourning. Her family shared photos online. Images of Shamaya smiling brightly, dancing, celebrating birthdays, just being young and alive. Those snapshots became symbols of what was lost, a future that would never be lived, a light that was stolen too soon. Each post was followed by comments of heartbreak, disbelief, and rage. The local community responded in love. Neighbors brought food. Classmates organized vigils. Churches prayed for strength. And though nothing could undo what had happened, people came together, not just to mourn, but to honor her. They spoke her name with reverence, lit candles in her memory, and promised she wouldn't be forgotten. As days passed, her story spread beyond Cleveland. Advocacy groups for domestic violence and teen relationship abuse picked up her story. They saw in Shemaya's case a painful, urgent reminder that abuse can happen to anyone, even young, seemingly happy couples. They urged others to pay attention to the red flags, to intervene early, to speak up. At vigils, people stood in silence holding signs that read "Justice for Shemaya" and "Love shouldn't hurt." Some wore purple ribbons, the symbol of domestic violence awareness. Others released balloons into the sky, hoping their messages would reach the young soul taken far too soon. Every gesture was a small way of showing that she mattered. Her high school, shaken by the loss, held a moment of silence. Teachers and counselors opened their doors to grieving students. Many recalled how bright and respectful Shemaya had been. They remembered her potential, her dreams, and the mark she left on her school community. Shemaya's death became a turning point for many in the neighborhood. It started hard conversations about dating violence, age-inappropriate relationships, and emotional manipulation. Parents began listening more carefully. Teens started opening up. And though the change came from tragedy, it sparked something vital: awareness. Her story was painful to hear, but it was necessary to tell, because behind the statistics of domestic violence are real people, like Shemaya, who laugh, who love, who live. And when those lives are cut short, we must not only grieve, but also grow. Her story reminded everyone that silence protects no one, and that love should never come with fear. In the end, Shemaya Nyer Allen became more than a victim. She became a voice, one that continues to speak to the hearts of her family, her friends, and every person who refuses to let her memory fade. Her life was short, but her impact is lasting. Shemaya's story is deeply personal, but it's not isolated. Her tragic death highlights a larger issue that too often hides in plain sight: young women in relationships with significantly older men. While not all age gap relationships are abusive, the difference in life experience, power, and emotional development can create dangerous imbalances. At just 16, Shemaya entered a relationship with a man who was already in his 30s. While she was learning how to drive and finishing high school, Brian Jackson had already lived through an entire adulthood. That gap wasn't just about years. It was about control. He knew more. He held more power. And he used it to dominate rather than nurture. Many young girls fall into relationships like this, thinking they found someone mature, someone who understands them better than boys their own age. But that perceived maturity often masks manipulation. Older partners can exploit the inexperience of younger ones, isolating them, grooming them, and shaping their worldviews before they're even fully formed. In Shemaya's case, the signs of an unhealthy relationship were there. Brian's jealousy, his possessiveness, his controlling behavior. These are classic traits of emotional abuse. But because he cloaked it in love, it became harder to see. And for a young person still figuring out what love should look like, it can feel confusing. It can feel normal. The sad truth is that abuse doesn't always start with bruises. It begins with control. With "where are you?" texts that turn into demands. With rules about who you can talk to. With subtle guilt and fear. And over time, it escalates. It narrows a person's world until they feel too scared or too tired to leave. Shemaya's death reminds us of why education and awareness are so important. Teenagers need to learn the difference between love and control, between attention and obsession. They need to know that real love respects boundaries, honors independence, and never resorts to violence, emotional or physical. Parents and guardians also play a key role. It's not about judging young people. It's about listening, paying attention, and asking gentle questions when things don't feel right. It's about creating a space where teens feel safe opening up about relationships without fear of being dismissed or punished. Advocates for domestic violence stress the importance of early intervention. Programs in schools, open conversations in homes, and visible community support can all help prevent tragedies like this. Because the warning signs are often there, we just need to be willing to see them. Shemaya's story serves as a wake-up call. It's a heartbreaking example of what happens when a young person is caught in an unequal, unhealthy, and ultimately fatal relationship. But it's also a chance for change, for families, schools, and communities to take proactive steps in protecting other young women. If we want to honor Shemaya's memory, we must do more than grieve. We must educate, support, and speak up, because every young girl deserves a chance to grow, to dream, and to love without fear. Shemaiah Nier Allen was more than just a name in a headline. She was a daughter, a friend, a student, and a young woman with dreams that reached far beyond the limits of what she lived. Her story is painful, but it's also powerful, a reminder of how quickly love can turn into control and how silence can have heartbreaking consequences. As we close this chapter of her story, we hold space for her memory. We remember her smile, her youth, her light, and we refuse to let her name be forgotten. Shemaiah deserved so much more. She deserved safety, growth, freedom, and time. But instead, her life was cut short by someone who claimed to love her, and that is something none of us should ever accept quietly. If Shemaiah's story moved you, please don't let it stop here. Share this video with someone you love. Let it spark a conversation. Let it open someone's eyes. You never know who might need to hear this message, who might be walking through something silently, hoping someone will notice. Your share could bring awareness, and your light could boost this story to reach more people. And your comment could let another survivor know they're not alone. These small actions have big meaning in a world where so many stories like Shemaiah's go unheard. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Lat True Crime Stories. We share real, powerful, and heartbreaking stories like this. Stories that demand attention and compassion. By subscribing, you become part of a growing community committed to telling the truth, raising awareness, and honoring lives that should never have been lost. Together, we can do more than watch. We can speak. We can act. And we can build a world where young women like Shemaiah are protected, empowered, and free to live the full lives they were meant to lead. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And most importantly, thank you for helping us keep Shemaiah's story alive.